Allow me to introduce myself. I'm George Clayton Johnson. I'm a TV writer. Basically, two categories: movies like Ocean's 11, Logan's Run, and television like The Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Kung Fu. And I've been doing it for a number of years. And I met Burt Shonberg, my friend, back in 1957. It's a long time ago. And he had a little apartment above the Sunset Strip. And by we, I think I meant all of us wannabe artists, guys who wanted to be directors or actors. They would go down to Schwab's drugstore and places like that to meet and greet people, but they would also hang out in Laurel Canyon itself. And there was a little restaurant up in that area called Vaughn's Cafe Galleria. And there was a patio outside of the Galleria. And so us wastrel types would gather there, and we referred to ourselves as the Faces. Have you seen the Faces recently? Because we inhabited that area, because we were beatniks who had quit our jobs and had turned on and had tuned in. And I was a wannabe writer who had yet to sell anything important to the movies or to television. But I had endless hopes, and I was getting grubbier by the day. And I can remember I didn't have a shirt on. I had a jacket, a loose denim jacket on, and some sandals. But all in all, you would not claim that I was a prosperous-looking fellow. My hair was too long, and I was hanging out with people who were misfits in the same way I was, and we were all comparing notes and posturing for each other, and so we sort of got to know each other. And among those faces was Burt Shonberg with his little apartment. I went up to his pad one day, boldly knocked on his door. Well, hello, George, how are you? Yes. He invited me into a very small cubicle, half of it made up with a drafting board on it. And one of my paintings over there, I got from him that very day. He said, would you like this? And he handed me this exquisite piece of work that had been carving some of the paint out on it. He had a painting underneath, and anyway, very interesting stuff. And I watched him doodle with it, and he saw that I appreciated what he was doing, and he ended up giving me the painting. And we became fast friends after that, and I began to take an interest in his painting, and I found out over those months in the early years of the late 50s that he was a wonderful painter. He painted coffee houses. Coffee houses were the rage. At one time, we owned a coffee house, me, Burt, and another guy. These coffee houses started out with a simple little European coffee house motif, and they blossomed all over Southern California. They had elaborate names like the Purple Onion or Pandora's Box or the Unicorn. And we would go and hang out at night on the Sunset Strip and other environs, dropping in at these various coffee shops, where if you really wanted to, you could spend an extravagant amount of money to buy a very tiny cup of coffee with an understanding that you could hang out there for hours if you did that. And so we would go and hang out for hours, drinking a little tiny cup of coffee, while we mingled with other wannabe artistic, avant-garde, bohemian people. And among those people was Burt Shonberg. And I saw this incredible stuff he was painting in these coffee houses, largely for food bills, so he could continue to eat. Because he had no job, he didn't attempt to get any. He spent some of his time in and out of psychiatric hospitals. Burt was a very, very disturbed guy, smart as hell, exquisite painter, but mildly deranged to the point where he was among those chosen to take part in LSD experiments in the very early 60s, where you would go to this facility and get your LSD, and then they would tape you and keep track of your pulse rates and all this stuff, and they would ask you what you're thinking about. And it's during that period that Burt began to see this sort of stuff, and this sort of stuff was intermingled into his work, and it combined Greek and Roman motifs along with things from allegories. You could see that he had read some or been told about Milton and things like that. He was a devout, good Christian boy. He assured me of that several times in our meetings with each other. And he came from Revere, Massachusetts. That impressed me, Paul Revere and all of that. And he was just one of a kind. And that's what I found myself attracted to, was people who were one of a kind. Among that people was Charles Beaumont. He's a writer. He wrote 22 episodes of The Twilight Zone and wrote a very realistic, serious movie called The Intruder, and is by and large known as a remarkable writer. A very good friend of Ray Bradbury, very good friend of William F. Nolan, very good friend of Richard Matheson and Jerry Soule and O.C. Rich and Ray Russell and Frank M. Robinson. Maybe some of those names strike you because they're editors and publishers and writers and painters. And so I met Charles. Now, Charles was the most remarkable thing in my life. Shonberg was a remarkable thing because he, in a way, represented what we all wanted to be, which was an itinerant artist who made his living making paintings. And I remember how quickly he took $800 for a painting that was finally offered to him, that he took off the wall in the Purple Onion, which was a very exquisite, a posh place by the mid-60s on the Sunset Boulevard, near where the old Schwab's drugstore used to be. And so I look back at those years of knowing Burt and occasionally going to visit with him, occasionally encountering him at a party, and knowing that we had mutual friends that we could talk about. Oh, have you seen Tad Duke recently? Because Tad was a young artist, and we all took a very good interest in, who was influenced by architecture in some wonderful kind of a way. Anyway, Burt Shonberg and Charles Beaumont. To Burt, I was a creepy hippie, I guess. To Beaumont, I was something he wasn't. He was meticulous. He wore a tie. He did a lot of things. He had an elegance about him. You know, you literally could see him shoot his cuffs as though he were wearing a tuxedo or something. And he knew about literature, and he knew about classical music, and he knew about great traditional American writers. But fortunately for me, I knew a little bit about those things too. So we could enter into conversation lucidly with each other about stuff that both of us only knew as hearsay, because it's in a book someplace, but we fortunately had read that book. And it was surprising to me the number of books that I had taken seriously that he is taking seriously. And all of the time, here's this Burt Shonberg. And I want Beaumont to meet Shonberg. And I want Shonberg to meet Beaumont. I don't think I brought them together for more than an hour, at which time Chuck commissioned Burt to make him a couple of paintings. I think this is one of those paintings.